All right. Hope you are still shoveled out. So we're going to get cracking again with Hobbes. We're behind, as you know. So we're going to get it done today with what Hobbes thinks is the social contract, or at least what is the rational justification of the sovereign, the legal system, and so on. And then hopefully we'll get into the parts on justice too. If not, then we'll leave it to Thursday, but by Thursday we'll definitely be done. Then we'll see where we are. Could you close the door again? It gets loud. So, just to remember where we are, said tries to justify the state. Hobbes does by showing two things: that life under the state's authority is rational to accept, precisely because the alternative, being a non-state, is so horrible, it's the worst thing possible, basically. And he thinks that there's no moral objection to the state. There's no moral standard to which we can hold the state once we're in it, except for what the state tells us, except for what the law says. And that's because there is really there's no morality outside of the law either, so there is no sort of independent standard that we can invoke. And in any case, we're supposed to revoke that once we get into schools. That's when we start talking about justice. So there's an underlying idea about justification, right? It's a rational bargain, and you have no moral objection to it, so that's going to be sufficient for justifying it. No complaints. So we've seen why the state of nature will be horrible. Today we're going to look at why the state and only the state can really end that, and next time we'll look a little more at the moral part. Here's a thing that Hobbes writes in chapter 17. This is the final cause and the design of men, in introduction of the restraint upon themselves, which you see them live in the Commonwealth, is the foresight of their own preservation and more contented life thereby. So, this should be familiar by now, right? Hobbes says, why do we go into the Commonwealth? Preservation, right? So you don't die anymore. Subtitles. And a more contented life. So you're not just mere survival, but actually just generally sort of living, like rising living standards, right? So you remember the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. That's the theory. And he says that you get that because you can't afford to be industrious in the state of nature. Because if you are industrious, you start building things and growing things, you make yourself into a target. Right? That's the stupidest thing you can do. And you should be seeking out targets. Becoming one. Notice that he's already here foreshadowing the role that the sovereign will play, right? Final cause and the design of men in the introduction of that restraint upon themselves. So you see, right, the whole point of the state, we'll see, is to create a restraint, like to create barriers for us to not do what we would do in the state of nature. The state of nature, we end up attacking each other because there are no limits that are enforced upon us. It's a free-for-all. In principle, you ought to be peaceful. Principle, you ought to be reliable, and so on, right? Because you try to preserve yourself, but you don't know if you can trust the others, and there is nothing to hold them in check. There's nothing to hold you in check, and that's where all the trouble starts. We've seen that. What the state does is it builds in these type of restraints. Right? It puts a limit on our ability to attack each other and our vulnerability to be attacked by others. And once that restraint is there, problem solved. That's what we'll be looking at. Specifically, right, how does the sovereign solve the problem? Well, by building these restraints. Right? We'll see what exactly they come to, but that's the point. And how do we create it? Well, we'll get to it. All right. Pedal to the metal. Any questions so far? You with it? The point about the restraints, right, is that the sovereign can give us the assurance that we need. If you remember from Hampton says state of nature is probably not correctly described as just this one-shot prisoner's dilemma, in which the incentives to cheat are the highest. Right? It's an iterated prisoner's dilemma, it's a repeated game in which we interact with each other time and time again. And actually, under those circumstances, the incentives aren't to cheat, they are to cooperate, if we can do so safely. She says that makes the trouble of the state of nature a little different than the way I've been sort of telling you about it, or which we've been describing it. That the state of nature is just this constant one-shot prisoner's dilemma, in which fighting is always the rational thing. That's sort of your caricature or standard way. It's a good way to think about it, to keep clear what the logic of the situation is. But really, Hampton says, probably a little more little subtler than that. And we talked about this. Some of you resisted the caricature analysis correctly. Right? You say, well, maybe we come across this other person again, and then cooperating starts actually make some sense. Why would we change? Why would we cheat our family and our friends? Right? Couldn't we just trust them? And Hampton says, yeah, you can. Problem is, that doesn't get you very far. As soon as you start dealing with people who you don't know as well, who you might only come across once, you don't really have the type of assurance, the type of protection that you need to trust them too. So you can get little small groups, but the bigger the groups get, the more unstable they get, and then when different groups meet each other, the same problems arise again, so you don't, it's still pretty crappy. So the whole point about the sovereign is to get you over the hump, right? So you get from all by yourself to little groups and families and stuff pretty easily, but then from that to a full society like the one we live in, which is really well, like much better. That hump, that's where the sovereign comes in. So here's the quote. I keep throwing out some quotes for you just so that you can locate the parts in the text where the arguments are. So if a covenant be made, covenant is just an agreement, a contract, right? Where neither of the parties perform presently but trust one another in a condition of mere nature, which is a condition of war, upon any reasonable suspicion for you. So this is just the problem of the state of nature, right? Can't cooperate. But if there be a common power set over them both, with right and force sufficient to compel performance, it is not void. So if there is enforcement power, there's this type of restraint, then actually you should. These things are binding. You should perform this one. For he that performeth first has no assurance that the other will perform after, because the bonds of words are too weak to bridle man's ambition. Avarice, anger, not a precious worse than suspicion, without the fear of some coercive power. But in a civil estate, where there is power set up to constrain those that would otherwise violate their faith, that fear is no more reasonable. So he says, look, you can't do, if you have this deal, we had an exchange last time, pencil for a book, right? Let's do it. I gotta kick out of this. Right, so we're in a state of nature, you and I, let's say it's a one-shot, like we don't know each other, there's no police, right? So I say, hey, can I have your little, your notebook? I'll give you a pencil, you say, yeah, sure, right? So I said, okay, well, give me your note. I'll give you the pencil later. You don't actually get it, right? So there's a little bit of it. So maybe you'll ask, well, give me the pencil first. Why don't you, say, hey, Van der Rossum, give me the pencil first. I'll give you the notebook second. What Hobbes is saying is, he that performs first, you have no assurance that the other will perform after. Right? So if I give him the pencil first, what I'm doing is I'm opening myself up to ending up not with a notebook instead of a pencil, which would be great. I'm opening myself up to the option of zero, right? Nothing, being broke, which is horrible. So now I've got to go out, find a new pencil, and I've got to keep looking over my bag and say, like, I don't need that thing. So he from first has no words because he says to me, yeah, I'll give it to you. Give me his word, but it's too weak to get, to bridle his ambition, avarice, anger, and other factors. He's probably he's a hothead, maybe. Right? So you might be greedy, or you might work, whatever. I don't know you. Right? So I can't trust you. So since I can't trust him, I shouldn't be giving the first, because that's really opening myself up, which is irrational in Hobbes says. Opening myself up to the worst possible outcome. Right. In the state, of course, that's no longer the case, because the state is going to fix this somehow. We'll see. More precisely here, the sovereign really plays three roles. One is, it will settle what is right and wrong, thus preventing disagreements from arising. This is legislative function. Hobbes, of course, the logic that we've been discussing is always state of nature, but the underlying problem is always disagreement, right? It's conflict. people wanting different things that are not compatible. So maybe we have an exchange somehow, right? Maybe in civil society we get this exchange, but then maybe we miscommunicated or something, and he thought actually you said it were going to be 2 pencils, and I said it was going to be 1 pencil. Right? Or maybe I go back and I said, hey, wait a minute, you've written all over this notebook. I thought it was an empty notebook. I want an empty notebook. This is no good to me. Give me back my pencil. And he said, no, a trade is a trade. Right? I said, no, that was not a trade. I was trading for something else. He says, well, you should have said that. Before we know it, we have a conflict. Right? And if we are hotheads, which we very well might be, this conflict will get ugly pretty fast. Now, so how we're going to solve that? First job of the sovereign is write down a rule. This is how we deal with situations like this. And of course, this is a notebook situation. If I can come up with a notebook situation like this, there's millions and millions of possible conflicts, right? It can happen in a large society. So the legislative function is for the state, the sovereign, to write down, here's what goes, here's what doesn't go. So notebooks, trade means it has to be an empty book or whatever. That's what in the law says, right? So settled. Now maybe it has to be an empty book, but maybe there's just some erased penciling in there or something, right? He says it's empty. I say, but I can still see the shades of the writing there. Is it empty or is it not? Right? He says it's empty. I say it's not empty. The law doesn't settle that. The law just says empty notebook. Right? So we have a dispute about what the law requires. So the second function that the state does is to actually settle cases where there is a dispute. Those of you, like Ian, who've taken philosophy of law classes in the past, will know that people like H.L.A. Hart, for example, H.L.A. Hart talks about how law always is open-ended, open-textured. This law has to be stated in general terms, because you can't legislate for every detail in life. Too much work, and new things get thought of, and new inventions come up, and then that's not in the law, so you have to have general rules for it to be workable at all. But if the rules are general, then there's going to be interpretation issues, always. That's an idea that tracks back to Hobbes. So that's the second part of the sovereign, the judiciary, settling what the law requires. And then third, just enforcement, right, the executive function. Talk more about the legislative next time when we talk about justice. Mostly today we'll talk about the stopping and the punishing. That's the restraint, right? That's really ultimately what matters the most. But for Hobbes, all three matter, right? He wants to get rid of conflict and fighting, so you need all of these. You need to settle what's right and wrong. You need to have some type of mechanism for solving disputes about what's right and wrong. And then you need some teeth. Right. So far, so good. Any questions so far? Once that is in place, Hobbes is saying, if there be a common power, right, then you're out of the state of nature. You're out of the state of nature by definition, because the power, just the absence of the power is the definition of the state of nature. But more interestingly, right, you're out of the problems of the state of nature. Because where in the beginning it was irrational for me to hand over my pencil first to justice, because I didn't know if I could trust him. And even if I could trust him initially, if there a dispute came up, I probably can't trust him because he's going to say, well, I erased it, it's empty, and I think it's not right. This is risky business. Now that there is a law that tells us what are the terms of the deal, there is someone I can go to, in the judge or the police, if a disagreement between us arises, who will settle this peacefully. And if I'm right and he's wrong and he won't cough up the notebook, I can go to the police and they'll get me one, right? Or get me my pencil back, one or the other. Either way, I'm not ending up in this worst situation with nothing. So that's how you come out. So a little more formally, you remember the prisoner's dilemma thing that we went through, right? So last time we said, imagine two strangers come across each other. Each has two options: attack or not, right? Or cheat or not, whatever the alternative is. Be bad or be good, right? Last time we were in the state of nature. This time we're not. We know that there is a sovereign, a police force, whatever, who will stop the attackers and punish them so as to not make it worth their while should they attack. So, two strangers, right? Here are the possible outcomes. Both attack. You attack, they do not. They attack, you do not. Or both just keep going. Last time we saw the rankings, right, from 1 through 4, which best and was not. In a state of nature, we said you attacking, they do not is your best option. You should take out the threat. You don't know if you can trust it. The worst would be they attack, you do not. Neither attacking was second best, both attacking was third best. That's causing the whole prisoner's dilemma situation. How would you rank them now? What do you think is your best option now in this situation? Neither attacks. First, why? If you attack, you get punished, right? Stinks. Getting in trouble. What's your second best?
They attack.
They attack, you don't? Yeah, I guess it would depend on how quickly they could show up, right? Police is right on the scene. Turns out it doesn't really matter when you rank this one second or that one second, this one third or that one third. Doesn't relate to the situation. Both attack, of course, not great, right? Because you're both going to prison. And you're hurt.
But at least they go too.
Sorry?
At least they go too, so you know.
Then you're really in prisoner's dilemma.
Well, yeah, remember, right? Like this, that's an interesting point generally. We started with one of the assumptions in Hobbes was that you ultimately care about yourself most. As soon as you start introducing preferences about what happens to other people, this gets a little tricky, but also the prisoner, just the state of nature situation gets trickier too. Right? If you care, like for example, a couple of classes ago, Will and I had a long discussion about what if you care about what you do to others. If you really have a preference for that ultimately, that might change the situation, might make you less willing to attack. Hobbes says, ultimately we care most about ourselves. At least when push comes to shove. Literally. Alright, so here's the rankings, right? Neither attacks first, both attack fourth, and then 3 and 2. Remember here the tree that we said your decision is independent of the other one decision. You get to choose whether you're above or below the blue line. Before, attacking was the best one because you had a 50% chance of 1, 50% chance of 3. That was better than 2 or 4. But now it's very clear, right? 1 and 2. Your two best options are by you're getting these by not attacking. If you flip those, it doesn't really matter because you get 1 and 3, which was still better because that was better. Last time it's better this time. Now it's weird. If it's like this, then it's weird. If the police really is on the street corner, then you. You have to be insane to attack. Which is exactly what Hobbes wants. Rational people, under these conditions, will stop attacking. They'll become peaceful. That's what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to make it rational for people, individually rational for them to be living together in a way that's good for all. Remember, in the past, the prisoner's dilemma situation is a problem because what is individually rational is opposed to what is collectively rational. What's good for me individually to do does not lead to a situation that's good for everyone. That's bad enough. It's really bad that it's also true for you, right? That's what's good for you individually to do does not lead to a situation that's good for everyone. So everyone is acting in a way that will not lead to a good situation for everyone. Hence the puzzling. You get these weird situations in which reasonable, rational people interact in ways that are really destructive. But here, what we have is we're aligning what is good for everybody, which is not attack, with what is good for each and every one of us. So we've changed something that was really destructive into something that's really productive, constructive. That's how it's studied. Quickly, you know this one, right? Same table, but now with different numbers, just the numbers 1 through 4 plugged in. Like last time, we can go through this. Just break it down. You, me, these are two options, right? I have the option, you have the option of attacking, not attacking. They have the option of attacking and not attacking. 4 possible outcomes, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is both attack, this is neither attack, this is they do not attack while you attack, this is you do not attack while they attack. The numbers represent how good the outcome is for you. What should you do? Well, think about it. Maybe let's assume that I don't know what they're going to do, but let's say that they attack. What should I do if they attack? Well, then we're on the left side, because I don't get to choose that, right? You get to choose only up or down. So we're on the left side. So up would be 4, down would be 2. I should go down. If they do not attack, 3, 1, I should go down. Down means not attack, so I don't attack, whatever the other one does. I either call the police or get on with my day. Those are my options. They are in the same situation, right? They don't get to choose up or down, they only get to choose left or right. So let's say that I'm an attacker, a thuggish character, then they attack is 4, not attack is 2, so they should not attack. If I'm a peaceful person, then attack is 3, not attack is 1, they should not attack. Doesn't matter what I do, they should not attack. Doesn't matter what they do, you should not attack. So both will be peaceful, you end up here. And hey, 1-1, that's the best for everybody. Once again, this is a Nash equilibrium, we talked about that, right? It's not in the interest of either of the parties to deviate from this choice. So this is beautifully stable. So long as we're dealing with rational people who care about their self-interest more than they care about other stuff. We get peace. Before we predictably and stably got war, now we predictably and stably get peace. There's your solution. That's Hobbes' insight. I'm speeding here, no pun intended. Are people on board, or is anyone any questions about how this is changing? Like, you see what's happening, right? The enforcement by the state, the threat of punishment changes how good certain options are. And if we're changing how good certain options are, then the ranking of the options or the outcomes is different. If the ranking of the outcomes is different, we have to change the numbers in here. And once the numbers are changed, what's rational for us to do, given our options, is different. Think about it hard, that's not what it will work.
One thing that might help is I think it with Hobbes, the gap that even if you can't figure out which is 2, 3, or 4, the gap between one and the other choices is really, really large.
You mean if you're going to, like, a cardinal value or something?
One is so much better than any of the other choices.
Yeah, right. So this is an ordinal ranking,
Yeah.
right? This is like ranking just in terms of like 1, 2, 3, 4, what's your best, but we're not looking at like how much better is the best compared to your second one.
Score it like golf. Whoever scores lowest wins.
Right. Right. And if you hit this 1 stroke, it's just as good as 10 strokes. Yeah. But of course, life is not like that. Right? In life, if you go to prison for 1 year or 10 years, makes a big difference. And if you get a scratch or you get a broken leg, it makes a big difference. Or you get nothing. So, yeah, if we start putting values on it instead of just rankings, then of course the power of this becomes even more stable because the drop-off towards the other options is all that bigger. But even ordinarily, it should be enough. Yeah. So, Terry's point is, what you want from a good state is you want them to be very reliable enforcers. Right? You want them to be there on every street corner. And you'd like the punishment to be pretty severe. Because the worse the punishment, the bigger the gap between being good and being bad. And that's what you want. So if the gap is really small, maybe the hot hats start taking over anyway, so I'll just eat the scratch for it. But if the gap is huge, if it's really 10 years to prison or just giving me the notebook, right? then you're actually going to give me the notebook pretty reliably. So you don't want to be, there's not much that's in Hobbes that would allow you to accuse him of being a bleeding heart or something. That's not Hobbes. Hobbes wants it to be clear and packing a punch. All right. So That's how you leave the state of nature. Right? You gotta create this thing that is strong enough to change the situation that we were in into a situation like this. Right? And so you need someone who's on street corners and someone who has the power to actually threaten people to make it rational to cooperate. Then you get there. This is why Hobbes doesn't think absolute rule is a bad thing necessarily. Absolute rule gets you there, really reliably. You know how police states are, like the police is everywhere, and they like throwing people in jail and stuff like that, so you know, it works. Hobbes doesn't think that's the only one. You could have non-dictatorship, but even that would do. So here are a couple of quotes. Remember, there is no natural solution available, right? In a state of nature where everything is natural, in the sense of non-created, you can't get out of the problem. Because we're roughly equal. None of us is strong enough to change the situation by punishing people. So what we need is an artificial man, that's what he called it. Another chapter. Meaning created. So what they need to do is we need to appoint one man or an assembly of men. It could be a group, right? It could be a democracy or something like that. To bear their person. We'll get to that. And everyone to own and acknowledge himself to be the author of whatever he that so beareth their person shall act or cause to be active in those things which concern the common peace and safety. And therein to submit their wills, everyone to his will as their judgment, and their judgment to his judgment. Right. So we appoint someone, right? Or a group, some institution created. Bear their person to be us in our stead as our agent. Everyone to own and acknowledge himself to be the author of whatever he that so beareth their person shall act. So everything that this person that we appoint or this group does, we as subjects have to accept as if it was ours. We accept this as if we are the author, as if we're doing it ourselves. So there is no opposition between what we want and what the law tells us. Right? We see the law as our own words, as our own will. At least when it comes to the common peace and safety, but that turns out to be everything. So now to submit their wills, everyone to his will, the sovereign's will, and their judgment, so our judgments to theirs. So we don't get to decide what's right and wrong anymore. The law settles that. Remember, that's the legislative function. And we follow. We obey. That's necessary to lead the state of nature. It's the generation of the great Leviathan, or rather to speak more reverently, even more reverently. That mortal God. Right? So, there's the immortal God in heaven, right? That's of course the ultimate enforcer. Right? But turns out we can't trust on the immortal God in heaven to fix things for us here on the earth, right? So what we need to do is we need to create the closest thing that we can get, which is a mortal God. That's the state. Right? So you better be afraid of the state like you be afraid of a God. You obey the state like you obey God. He has the use of so much power and strength conferred upon him that by the terror thereof, you're so afraid of this Leviathan. He is enabled to form the wills of them all, to peace at home and mutual aid against their enemies abroad. Right? It cannot be strong enough. Marshall.
I just have questions about this immortal God. Does Hobbes believe in the God of traditional Western theism?
There's a loaded question. Officially, on the record, yes.
If that's true, then isn't he responsible for the state of nature?
God?
Yeah.
Is God not responsible for the state of nature? Well, he could be, yeah.
Then why would they want to make a God in the form of man like that already put us in the state of nature and we had to fix it, not God? Why would we want to worship a God like that? Not to become Christopher Hitchens here, but it doesn't really make sense. Why would we want to make something as close to someone who created this horrible state of nature?
Yeah.
Probably got out.
Yeah, so it's a tricky question.
I much prefer to ask Hobbes.
Well, generally, it'd be much better for him to be here than for me. Yeah, so God created the state of nature. Why would we want to create something like God to get us out of it? Is that
Yeah.
the word? Yeah, so on the record, he definitely believes in God as the Christian tradition has it. Off the record, it's not so clear. He got in a lot of trouble over this. A lot of people thought he was an atheist, and he had to flee the country. He spent a number of years in Paris, partly because of his involvement in the English Civil War. Chose the wrong side. Partly also, but he was also suspected of being an atheist, which back then could get you killed. So, but he has a lot of stuff, like there's chapters in the Leviathan, the book of Leviathan, on like the kingdom of God, and he's doing a lot of work to try and show just how pious he is. But then all the arguments don't rely on God at all. Like, all of this is like, yeah, there's God. Just doesn't really work for us, so let's set aside. He goes through these unfortunate things. So I don't know. Am I misrepresenting this, Terry?
I mean, I think that basically what has been presented as an ingenious form of the problem of evil.
Right, yeah. No, but I mean, was that not representing, misrepresenting Hobbes so far?
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that Hobbes was an atheist or
Yeah.
a non-theist.
Most people, yeah, I mean, he had all the markings of an atheist. He was into the natural sciences in a very scientific and sort of dispassionate way. He was, I don't know if that's all said it before, anyway. During his day, the two main contenders for understanding the way that gases behave were like Boyle, who's the author of the ideal gas law, and Hobbes. Those were the two. So he was really at the cutting edge of natural science. He was approaching that in a way that made no reference to God at all. It was this Newtonian kind of approach. And so he did use the same method you can see in political philosophy, like deconstructing, using the scientific glasses, very dispassionate. Like, it's not because people are good or bad or evil that we're in this bad situation. It's not because God is sort of God won't come save us like other thought. Right? So sideline all of that. So that's just on Hobbes. But your question is an interesting one. Like, well, if there is a God, then how what do we make of him creating such a bad situation? Yeah, that's a general worry that people have about the idea that there might be a God. Well, see, really, it's a problem of the conjunction of two ideas. That God exists and that he's all good. Of course, if God exists and he's crappy, right? That's not a puzzle, right? Because then we have a crappy situation created by a crappy God. Well, that makes sense. What's problematic is if he exists and he's all good, which I think pretty much everyone who believes that he exists also believes he's all good. So pretty much everyone who believes he exists has a problem. How come something all good can create something all crappy? But that's not just the state of nature. Even in civil society, that's going to be true. We still have murderers walking around. We still have rapists. The Holocaust happened. Like, how do we deal with that? Yeah, I don't know. There are answers. People debate whether they're good answers or not. Sometimes the most popular answer is that it was part of the all goods God's plan, and this is a good plan, thereby, that people would have free will, and that in the exercise of that free will, they have the ability to make mistakes, and that this is sort of our existence with free will is much better than it would be without free will. So the possibility of mistake is maybe necessary to make the right choices be good, something like that. But then, of course, if you build the world that way, you're going to get horrible things happening. So that's an answer. Doesn't really matter for us that much, but that's an answer. Decide for yourself if it's a good answer, or a good enough answer. Hobbes' point here is slightly different anyway. What Hobbes is trying to say is, even if you do believe in God, and you think he's all good, and you think cooperation and peace in civil society is also good. You might think, well, that was my answer, right? Like, why will society be good and peaceful? Well, there's this good God that's doing good things, and peace is good. He's saying, don't trust on that. Right? What you need, because all the arguments we've seen before, and we saw last time, he emphasizes, not because people are bad, it's because the situation that we end up behaving badly. We can't trust on the immortal God, so we have to create something that would be, it's like a facsimile, right? Something that's the closest thing that we can have to the thing that we're imagining that would solve the problem. So it's not actually solving the problem, it's too far away. So that's kind of what he's trying to do. Did I get to where you're going?
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else? So, it's in everyone's rational interest to obey for two reasons. The alternative is punishment, right? And punishment is against your self-interest. But also, this is always this recurring theme in Hobbesian theory. Disobeying the law means acting outside of the law. You're stepping out of civil society. And to that extent, you are you start pulling on the thread, right, that holds together the whole fabric of society. And society consists of people cooperating. Now, if you break the law, you are no longer cooperating. And that means, right, you're moving outside of civil society. And what is outside of civil society? It's the state of nature. And that's the worst thing, right? So it's against your self-interest, both in the short term, because you're going to go to prison, but also in the long run. Like, you keep doing this, it's going to get real bad real quick. All right. I know we're kind of flying through this. So, all right, here's a question. This is an important and a deep one. So, we saw before, Justice and I were trying to do a trade in the state of nature, right? Couldn't get it done. Bless you. Covenants in the state of nature are void. Agreements, contracts, right? But if contracts are void, then how can the social contract be formed? Right? The social contract is formed in the state of nature because it's the thing that gets us out of the state of nature. That's the Yatra transition moment. So, of course, once the sovereign is created, you can enforce a contract, making it rational perform. But we're not there yet, right? We're trying to get there. So who's the very first one? Right? Who's the very first person who put down their weapons? Because that's how we do. We all have our clubs and our knives and stuff. And then we say, okay, all of us, give all of our stuff, all of our weapons to the sovereign. Then he has all the weapons, and you can say, okay, great idea. You go first. And that's the same problem, right? That was stopping us the first time. Why is it not stopping us now? Anyone have any? What do you think?
I think you just go at the same time.
You can go at the same time? So like count to 3? And everyone throw their...
Well, how do you trust everyone to throw their weapons at the
Yeah.
same time? What if it's like a 1, 2, 3, and I keep my club? And
Start
then
beating people
you
up
guys
the
don't
head.
have clubs, so now
Well, then now the sovereign has all of our other clubs, so they just beat you up. Because you're the one person who catch your club.
What if the sovereign is only one person and there's a whole bunch of other people with clubs?
What if everybody is like him and just holds on, and you're the only one who throws their club? That's the danger, right? Like, now you're dead. So you're thinking to yourself, well, that means I'm dead. I can't risk death, so maybe I should hold on to the club too. So now what we're doing, all of us are doing this, right? Like, so 1, 2, 3, and everyone stands there still with their clubs. Everybody. That's the worry. Dominic?
Well, the diction he uses against the covenant of every man with every man, where they confer all their powers and strengths onto this Leviathan. So the way that I would see it playing out is it'd be like a general assembly of, I guess, there would be like a certain, like warlords and tribes, whatever, and they would probably have to get together. So it wouldn't be like literally every person, but it would be the strongest of the strong getting together, drawing up this covenant where you are motivated, it's in your self-interest to go ahead and confer your power onto this Leviathan you're making, because if you're all conferring in this like general assembly kind of thing, and you're the one that doesn't go ahead and confer to this Leviathan, well then that just gives everyone else incentive to go ahead and kill you, because you're not going to go with this Leviathan that is going to get everyone out of nature.
And so how is it rational for the whole point for Hobbes is in the state of nature, it's not rational to be the first person to do your side of a deal.
Well, yeah, it's rational when you get here in this assembly, because you're all like, so let's say it's all of us in this general assembly, and we're all getting together and we're saying, hey, this is a good idea, let's go ahead and do it. And you say, okay, let's put down our weapons. And let's say, I put down my weapon first, and nobody else does. Well then, I mean, I feel like there's something pulling up intuition saying that, okay, well, this is the person that's actually going to try to make this society work.
Right.
And the ones that don't put their weapons down are the ones that will not make the society work. So I think it seems unlikely that one person will put down their weapons. It will take a group of people, and they can probably get solved that way. Because at this point, when you're coming together and suddenly conferring your powers on other people, you're starting to tap into your rational self, and the rational self of working collectively together. And it doesn't sound exactly like this static relationship that the state of nature is. It's more of a dynamic relationship when you're trying to build for a future. So that's why I think the incentive comes, is because you're building for the future. I mean, I could be wrong. This is all just pointed intuitions and probabilities and stuff. It's really inductive, but still, that's how I see it playing out.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying. I think in a second I'll explain this. Hampton, not in the thing that we're reading, but in another book of hers, gives an argument that's similar to what you're thinking, I believe. So I'll get back to you. Back to that in a second. Well?
Okay, now I apologize because to make this point, I'm going to have to geek out really quick. Essentially, there's this episode of Star Trek Voyager, and the situation is that they're cruising along through space in their spaceship, and they get sucked into this void. In the void, there is nothing. It's all just nothing. But there are other ships in the void, and they're all attacking each other to get the resources because there's no other resources or food or water or power in the void. So the only way to survive is to attack each other. And essentially when Voyager, captained by Captain Janeway, who's the best starship captain ever, sorry for card fans, essentially she has to take this risk that ends up being rational because she figures out that there's a way to get out of the void. But the only way to do that is to have several ships all at the same time perform this action. So she can't do it by herself. But she also can't just like drop her shield and stop powering up weapons all the time because then everyone will attack her. So she has to think it over. And the situation is essentially this same thing. Because if she drops a shield, then she is opening herself up for the risk of being attacked. But she realizes that the rational thing to do is that, because by not doing that, you are accepting that you are not going to preserve your life and be stuck in this void and eventually starve to death, even if it's only a few months later. Eventually, the state of nature, if you do not put down your clubs, will get you killed. And you know that you'll have to take a risk to make that society, to put your club down first, but that's the only actual way that has a chance of protecting you. Because not doing it, not putting down your club is an illusion of protection. You're not really protected. So rationally, you have to do what is, there's only one option that's actually going to keep you alive, even if it's a risk that they'll attack you first. And that's to put your club down first, or to lower your shields, combine, get out of the void, and continue adventuring and being awesome. So rationally, there's one choice that protects you, and that is to put your club down. Because even if you don't die that day, you'll die later, because the state of nature will kill you.
So if you have to choose between dying today and dying later, which do you choose?
That's not the choice, but essentially, and I guess, and this is debatable, but her argument is, and I agree with it, is that that's not the choice. The choice is...
But it is in the state of nature, right? If it wasn't, if the choice was dying now or dying now, then you're indifferent.
No, but I'm saying that the choice to use your example because it's simpler, of who puts their club down first. If you don't, then you'll live for now, but you will die because the state of nature will get you killed. It's brutish and short and nasty, right? So that is the choice. So that's one choice. Not putting your club down is dying a bit later and horribly and having a short, crappy life. Or the other choice is take a chance at dying now and a chance at living longer and happier and safer. That's the real choice. That's essentially what she's arguing, that those are the two choices in the state of nature. Not
right, so there's definitely a pull to this, right? So you're right that the choice is between continuing this crappy existence and a gamble between immediate death and the promised land.
It's the certainty of death
But it's-
eventually, or the possibility, if not, even though it's slimmer, of longer life and happiness.
Right, but the problem with all the state of nature fighting is that as long as the chance of immediate death is significant, and it's not trivial, Hobbes points out, well, as a rational person, you can't take that chance. So maybe the state of nature is going to get you tomorrow. Then again, you survived this far, so maybe you can survive another year. Maybe that's much better than dying now. And so there's definitely, so the intuition that both Dominic and you are pulling to is like, wait, there is this sort of, this pot of gold, and it's right there for the taking. How come we can't cooperate as rational beings to take it together? Right? It's good for all of us. And it's a puzzle, it's just a puzzle, right? Yeah. Hobbes is saying, well, because there is the risk of grabbing it is also death, right? And that's just the thing that keeps blocking us all over and over again. The problem here is, look, if he thinks he can come up with an answer why we could cooperate to create the sovereign, somehow it's rational for us to all throw down our clubs and our weapons and our knives. Why can't we do it in the other places in the state of nature? Like if cooperation now is rational for us, if I can trust you guys now, this is the biggest choice of them all, right? Because I'm going to go hand over all my weapons and make myself as vulnerable as I can. So if I can cooperate on that one, well then why were we fighting yesterday? Because why, like we could have done, like we can, a pencil and a notebook, we can do that. If we can do a social contract, we can do that. And if we can do that, then maybe we can do some furniture and some wheat or something, right? Some bread or some clothes. Now we have a bit of a society going. Michaela.
I don't know if this exactly has to do with it, but it's a question about the prisoners duel disorder.
Yeah.
Speaking of prisons, so in the Dark Knight, Batman, and there's the prisoners on one boat, and there's the citizens on the other boat, and the prisoners are like, hey,
Right.
one of you is going to blow up the other, or I'm both going to blow you up. Like, that would be considered a prisoner's dilemma with the idealistic outcome.
Yeah, quite literally, it's a prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah, I mean, but like,
Yeah, right.
Hobbes would say that was definitely not realistic, the fact that they both did not.
Yeah, let's see, what's the setup again? The setup is they both have a detonator for the other boat, right? So if you take them out first, they cannot take you out.
Yeah.
And then-
midnight, they both get blown up anyways.
And if you both don't blow each other down.
Right.
But then Batman says he makes specific.
Right, yeah, so the rational thing would be to blow up, depending on whether you think the threat is credible. So, of course, you have to believe that at midnight you will be blown up. But if you really believe, if you think he's just bluffing, then that changes the game. But if you believe that at midnight you're going to get blown up, unless you blow up the other first, then Hobbes would predict that. Not just predict, Hobbes would prescribe. Right? He would say you ought to. The right thing for you to do is to blow the other guy up, other boat up before they can blow you up. Because self-preservation is the ultimate.
Usually not a Batman to come in and change the playing field all of a sudden. But I guess that's
Well, yeah,
like-
good. Well, if you
like,
know
yeah,
that maybe if you don't blow up, there could be a savior coming by. That of course changes. But if the only options are certain death or save yourself at the expense of others, then that's
So would Batman be kind of like the states, like the sovereign sort of?
I don't think he really saved, did he?
No, they both
He
decided
was
to
counting on both of them to blow each
No, but
other
like-
out. There's no third trigger.
But at the same time, they would have both gotten blown up.
Yeah,
They
someone
can't,
stopped.
like, stop each other. We can stop this, I'm sorry, it was just it was a good connection.
yeah. I think. Well, for the analogy to hold, what Batman would have had to do is would have to threaten both groups with something worse than being blown up if they press the button first, right? Which is, and that's Hobbes' point, right? Like, well, in the state of nature, there's nothing worse than certain death, so you can't threaten someone worse than that. So,
What if a sovereign, instead of offering punishment for the wrong, this is really idealistic, but what if you added rewards to the instead of the punishment?
yeah, it's interesting. So, added reward. At some point, right, it might become that it's going to be a product of the rationality of the choice is going to be a product of the chances you ascribe to being blown up and staying alive, and how bad being blown up is and how good staying alive is. So, let's see.
Wait,
That's
isn't there already?
I don't really write it out. It's too much math. But, if you think the chances of being blown up are really, really slim, then maybe what Will was saying is correct, right? You say, well, the promise of the civil society is really, really good. The chances of dying are really, really small. I'll take my chances. And so the better civil society or better cooperation becomes, the quicker it becomes rational to take the risk, just because the promises increase. That's a good thing, Hobbes thinks, because once we're in civil society, we see how great life is, and that's going to make us stay honest. We want to continue getting these great rewards. Interestingly, I know actually people have done, behavioral economists have done experiments. So you can put people in these sort of experimental setups where they're behind a computer screen and have to make decisions about decisions that have risks and rewards. And it turns out that in terms of getting people to stop free riding, rewarding them actually works better than punishing them. So psychologically, you're right. Whether that's rational or not is different. So you see this in real life, right? Like, for example, like the lifeguards, for example, right? Or is it Coast Guard? Sorry. Coast Guard is it's funded by charitable donations. It's not a government agency, and it's not by tax dollars. Just people give money to it. One way they do it is they put plaques up, right? They say like, hey, family Jones, the Jones family gave us money. Here's a plaque. Like, thank you. Right? That's rewarding in a simple social way, right? Just giving some type of praise or social glory, as Hobbes would put it, to people in response of doing good things, and that works. Right? That's why you walk in front of Faust building here. You have these walkways, all these little bricks and names. That's the reason it's there is because it's not because the university is because it gets people to give money. That's why it's there, right? It works, that kind of stuff. The Bryant business school. Right? Give us your money, we'll put your name on it. It gets people to give money. So you're right. All right, Cameron, you've been very patient.
Oh, well, it's sort of moved on now, it's all right.
Okay. Can you do it quickly, Will? Because I have my social one. Right. So, two options here. One is the one that I think Will and Dominic were hinting at. This is the one that Hampton says. Hampton says maybe we can do a two-stage process. Right? First, we have some type of conditional agreement. We say, hey, I'll throw down my weapons if you also agree to throw down your weapons, and then later we'll appoint someone who gets all the weapons. Right? So we don't really first make us risk it. And then once everybody says yes to that, everybody agrees conditionally. Then the second stage can be we select a leader, and then that one gets all the weapons. And that, the word she says that can be you can kind of get rid of the free riding or the cheating problem. Because you first say it's conditional upon everyone else agreeing, and then they'll. It's debatable whether they solve the problem. Because you might, of course, be afraid that people would say, yeah, sure, if you do. And then the second time when the second stage is where really the rubber meets the road, right? And now, how do I know you guys weren't just saying that? But there seems to be something to the idea that, well, since we have some sort of willingness to cooperate, and we realize the big gains that are there, that with this conditional agreement, we can kind of get there. The book is Hobbes and the Social Contract Edition. She has this whole formal apparatus that basically is that's the argument. Maybe it solves it, maybe it does not. Here's another one. Maybe it's just not a real contract, right? Maybe we're not talking about a historical episode. It doesn't need actually signing. Maybe what Hobbes is doing, I think this is probably the more interesting bottom line. He's not talking about an actual contract, he's talking about an idea. This is a rationale, a justification for the state. If we can tell a story where it would be rational for everyone to sign the social contract in a self-interest, if we could get there. And that's all the story we need to see that the state that we actually live in is justified. If Hobbes' story goes through, then nobody has a complaint against the state, and if nobody has a complaint against the state, then we can stop worrying. That too is debatable whether that's good enough of an answer, right? Because, of course, this story requires that it would be rational for us to sign the social contract. And the question we're asking is it rational for us to sign the social contract? So This is an issue in Hobbesian theory. It's not resolved. People go back and forth. Answers like this are trying to sort of get us across that bridge. The trick is, the Hobbesian has to keep in mind that cheating and fighting and prisoner's dilemmas are real things. Because if, as soon as we start weakening that, as soon as we say, yeah, we can sign the social contract because we can just cooperate, well now, state of nature isn't that bad anymore. That's key to the argument. Because if the state of nature isn't so bad anymore, then maybe not every state is a good deal anymore. You see that in Locke. Locke says, state of nature pretty bad, not that bad, and actually absolute rule, much worse. So that's not a rational view. So there's this tricky balance in Hobbesian theory. You have to say, we cannot cooperate, and that's why the state of nature will be horrible, right? And then they say, well, we can sign a social contract, which seems to involve some type of cooperation. So the question is, can they get cooperation, so can they get enough cooperation so that we can get a social contract and still have the state of nature be crappy? Right? Is that balance? Does it exist or not? Done.
I just kind of like this. Has anybody tried to explain the escape of the state of nature, like by empire? So like if you look at like the way the civilized world kind of naturally progressed was by like the Roman Empire, and that seems like to be the most reasonable.
You mean just conquest?
Yeah. So like you just have like one warlord, like let's say you're the strongest, you incentivize people to stay loyal to you, and then you also incentivize others by giving them public goods, and you just continually just kind of like conquering people who realize that it's better to live with you than against you, kind of thing. Has that like been like the early examples? I've never really heard that as an argument of how to get out of the state of nature.
Yes. The answer is yes. So you'll see if you read a little more than what I assigned for Locke next week. Locke has some speculative history in the second treatise. So what he does is he gives you an account of how he thinks sort of stable societies first arose. He says, you first you get your families living together, and then it's probably the father who's in charge because he's strongest, and then you have a bunch of families living around each other, and then they sort of select whoever's the strongest amongst their group of the strongest. So they have someone there, and then there's a small society, and then maybe you get a little village, and then there's sort of just someone will stand out as the best one, and they'll follow that person. And then at some point he says, then it gets too big to do it that way, and then there will be. He actually thinks there will be historically there was a moment when they actually came together and signed a social contract, and then there's your story. Has a whole story about it. Anyway, so he does talk about how you can get out of the state of nature sort of by small steps. It does involve a social contract, but there are steps before then, so there's a little bit of that. For Hobbes, it's not clear how we can say that, right? Because the whole problem with the state of nature is that we can't get these groups to get going. Right? As soon as the thing is going, it's fine, right? Maybe the state of nature is over, we're safe. But you can't get out. That's the problem. So you need to have some type of moment, changing moment where there is this Deus ex machina, not to invoke the immortal God again, right? There's this God that shows up from off stage left or whatever, sweeps in and solves it. There's your situation. But the problem is, of course, if the God isn't doing it, then how do we get out? So that said, once some place has a state, let's say that one place miraculously manages to get it, and then starts occupying, like through empire or the rest, Hobbes thinks that's fine. Sovereignty by conquest is just as good as sovereignty by sort of like appointment. Right? Like if a group of people came together and says, well, I'll follow you, dominate, that's great. But if they appointed me and then you come in and you bash my brains in, then that's fine, then it's still you. Right? matters for Hobbes. Think it historically, right? Hobbes came up in the Civil War, which was primarily about succession. So you had Charles I, Charles II, fighting against two different types of parliaments, the Rump Parliament and the Long Parliament. Anyway, it's a point about like who's ruling, right? And so you have parliaments claiming to be the sovereign, and you have kings claiming to be the sovereign. And the king says, we have the bloodline, and they say, well, we have the consent of the people, and so you have these two different claims to legitimacy, and Hobbes can't have any of that, right? can't have one person saying, I'm the legitimate one, but the other one still saying, well, but blood is what doing it. He said, no, all that doesn't matter. What matters is, are you in charge? So if you can just come in and kick out the other ones, as long as you make them safe, you're the boss. But there's still this problem. How do we get that the first time? Just wanted to flag this because it's a major problem in the theory. And if you can write a good paper on it, there's your careers. Alright, so finish this up. So Hobbes needs to show that the sovereign of the state, and only the state, can solve the problem of anarchy, the state of nature. The sovereign can do this because it can rely on the combined strength of society. Because we all submit our wills and our judgments, and we all say, whatever the state says, I will consider it to be as if it was mine. I will see myself to be the author of the law. So if the state tells me to arrest this guy, right, it's like me saying to myself, okay, let's go arrest this guy. I'm doing it. So whatever the state does, everyone will follow it. And that gives you the assurance, right, for cooperation. Now we have the enforcement. No individual can do this because of rough equality, and no group that can exist in the state of nature can do it because they will be unstable to get big enough. So, the first part is the state can do it, the second part is nothing but the state can do it. He's committing to some counterintuitive things, if you weren't scared enough maybe. We have ideas about duress these days, right? So if you you know the Godfather films, it's pretty provoking movies. An offer you can't refuse is not, it's not an offer, right? It's a threat. So he's saying, do this or you die, basically. Now, normally, at least under normal contract law, a lot of people think ethically too. You think you're not bound by that type of agreement. So, what is it? The studio boss gives Frank Sinatra, whoops, the other guy, his big studio contract because he finds the horse head in his bed, right? That's not really a binding contract, most people think, because he's threatened, he's coerced into it. Hobbes says no way, right? No binding. Clearly, he says covenants entered into by fear into the condition of human nature are obligatory. You're bound. So question, why? Why does he think he has to say it? It's really important for him. Theoretically really important.
Because you give all your rights to the state, so whatever right whatever company you enter with the state, you kind of enter into it by fear because if you refuse, then you're naturally coerced into it because you already gave all your rights up to the state.
Yeah, right. So the reason he has to accept this is because the reason we enter into the social contract is fear of the state of nature. We get into the state because the alternative is so bad, we're literally afraid for our lives, right? Like we're fearing death. And that's why we sign it. Now, if it's good enough for the studio boss to say, oh, I was afraid of my life, it's not binding, right? Then it'd be good enough for me in society when the tax man comes, right, and says, you owe me $5,000. I say, no, I don't. No, I don't. He says, yeah, you joined the state of nature, you signed the social contract. I said, well, it's not binding to me because I was afraid of my life when I signed it. The whole thing blows up. The whole point of it is that you don't get to opt out when things don't go your way. So it's really important for him. But this is kind of a strange thing to say, right? There's other things. We'll see more about justice, but there's also things about liberty. We'll come back to this in a lot. You remember he just says liberty is just the absence of external constraints. That's a strange idea of liberty. Studio boss was free not to sign the singer. Nothing was stopping him. Of course, he was getting killed, but that's an option. You could choose that. That's a weird idea to think about liberty. It's a weird idea to think about binding contracts, maybe. But there you go. Yeah.
It's almost as if Hobbes said, yes, the state of nature is fearsome, but the only way to get men out of the state of nature is to give them something they fear more. And that's being the sovereign power.
Yeah, I can see why he's saying that. It's not quite possible for him, right? Because the state of nature is certain death, and that's the worst. So it'd be irrational to fear something more than the worst thing. But yeah, you have to fear the sovereign, like the wrath of the sovereign has to be just as bad.
A real fear, okay.
Right.
That's a better way to put it.
Yeah.
It has to be just as real, not just as bad.
Or worse, right? Yes. No, I was jumping on the worst part. That it couldn't be worse. But of course, the sovereign can threaten you with something as bad for when they come for your life. And of course, Hobbes says at that point, all bets are off. That's the one time you get to disobey the law is if they try to kill you. We saw one of the reading questions was about that, and Hampton discusses why that's actually a big problem for the theory. Right? There will be several moments in which the state's stability might rely on people obeying the law, even though it's very dangerous. For example, in war. All right. Anyone any questions so far? Or so far? Hold his way. All right, we've got 10 minutes left. Let's talk about one of the reading questions we'll get for the next thing. So one of the reading questions for the readings from Justice was, Hobbes describes the natural right that we all enjoy in the state of nature. What is a right to? Remember what the natural right is?
Was it the natural right to everything?
Yes, the natural right to everything. Yeah, what do you mean to everything?
That, well, he said it was the natural right to preserve your life and any means which you must use to accomplish that. So that means, like, you must acquire food because we need sustenance to live, but that also means I can steal your food if it allows me to live, because I have the right to do everything, whether morally good or bad.
Good, yes. So you have the right to preserve your own life and all the means that are necessary to it. And in the state of nature, anything could be a means necessary to your life. And so therefore you have a right to it. Now when he says right to everything, what is can you explain what what does that mean, ultimately?
I think the word that they used in the reading we just did was claims on everything. So if you have some chicken fingers and dude, I'm really into chicken fingers, I'm gonna claim those. But you also have a claim on them, and that's how disputes get started, and that's why you need the state to be no. Yeah. So it's kind of anything that you want or think that you need to survive, you put a claim on, but everyone's going to put a claim on that because it's their right to exist, right? It's their right to survive. So then a dispute happens because we both want the last cup of water. Her must start with water. Do you guys drink today?
Yeah, that's interesting. So the choice of the word claim, so you're basically right, but I'm going to say something quickly about the choice of the word claim here. Turn this off. At least when I press off. So there's a standard distinction that philosophers like to make between different types of rights. You might have heard this before, but it's good to specify one for sure. So there's different types of rights that we can make. One would be the so-called liberty right, and another is often called a claim right. And then there's different ones as powers and immunities, but I'll leave those aside. They don't really matter for us. So two different kinds. Now, if you're talking about claims, if we're talking about the right being a claim, then what people say is, this is just a matter of analyzing what it is that we're saying, right, when we use these terms. They have correlatives, so that means to say that I have a claim right to something, chicken fingers or my life, means that other people have to respect that claim. Now, how do they have to respect that claim? Not just if they feel like it, right? Just all the time, all of my life. They have a moral obligation and a moral duty. So they say the correlative here is duty to a claim. So if you have a claim to your chicken fingers, that means I and everybody else here will have a duty not to take your chicken fingers, not to eat your chicken finger, and so on. Now that's usually distinguished from a liberty right, which is going to be a little confusing, but you have to don't have to think about this. The opposite is a no right. This means nobody has no right, meaning no claim. If you have a liberty to something, a liberty to move from here to here, that just means that everybody else has no right that I don't do it. No right against me if it gets in the way of the liberty. So no claim. So if you have a claim to your chicken fingers, then I have no liberty right with respect to your chicken fingers. Just analytically. You'll see diagonally, these are the opposites. Those are opposites. So the opposite of liberty is a duty. And if you have a duty, then you're not at liberty to do it morally. And if you are at liberty to do it morally, then you don't have a duty. And liberty is opposite of duty. You know these things. So, why am I saying this? If you say that in a state of nature you have a right to everything for Hobbes, what he's saying, in the state of nature there are no claims. So you have the right idea. It's just I'm jumping on it because you invoked the terminology of claims, which in philosophy has a specific meaning.
Yeah.
And so what he means for Hobbes is there are no claims. So no claims means there are no duties. Well, the opposite of duty is a liberty, so if there is no duty, then there are no liberties. So then it's all liberties, sorry.
The claim, I didn't come up with that. So that was in the reading? So was
The Hampton reading?
Yeah. So was that, so did you use that word on purpose?
I have to look into it.
To make this argument, or I was curious?
Yeah, I'll look back at it. If you can find it, the specific page or something where you were looking, then I'd like to know it. For now, anyway, to make sure that we get this right,
Yeah.
claim we can use in different contexts, right? Sometimes it's just some talk about it in descriptive ways of you're claiming something. But when we describe a right as a claim right, then usually we say it's something that you can claim against others, right? Like to the point that others have to respect what your right is. And Hobbes' point, as Jorge was saying, in the state of nature, everyone doesn't have to respect anyone else's claims or rights to anything else, because I have a right to use anything that's necessary for my own preservation. And so, and anything could be necessary. So, you might say, well, these chicken fingers are mine, but I have a right to take them if I think that they're necessary for my preservation. And if I'm at liberty to take them, that means, like relatively, you have no right to them. But right meaning the claim.
I think, I'm not sure because I didn't write specifically the word, but I think it's the last paragraph on page 49 in that reading. Because I'm just curious now, because I didn't really know that the claim was like a whole thing, but I'm just curious if they were like making that same point.
Yeah, I'll look into it. But anyway, the point that matters now is that for Hobbes, when he says the natural right is a right to everything, it doesn't mean that you get to claim everything and everyone else has to respect it. That's the thing that the absolute monarch might have, right? So like Louis XIV, right? The king said, the state belongs to me. What he's saying is, like, this is mine, right? And you don't get to take it without asking me first. Right? You have to go through me and get my permission. And if I say no, screw you, let me be cake or something. Right? I'll throw in my time references through. In the state of nature, that doesn't exist, because we don't have I have a right to take anything, but only in the sense of liberty, right? Meaning like I'm free to take anything. But if I'm free to take anything, that means nobody has this type of claiming right against me. For those things to exist, we need the state, because the state can actually enforce its duties. And then the duty can exist, and if the duty can exist, then the claim can exist. But now, in the state of nature, I can't have any duties, because duties are obstacles, they're barriers, they're things I cannot do. And like Jorge was pointing out, in the state of nature, there are no obstacles, there are no barriers. You get to do anything. This is also why justice cannot exist in the state of nature. Right? Justice requires these duties. There are none, so justice is empty. Cameron, you have your hand.
Yes, I was going to ask. So would that mean that liberty is a negative right and claim is a positive right? And this is really just a question just for my own understanding.
Right.
I suppose.
It depends what you mean. Negative and positive rights also has a, I could go on and on, not just as long a rant on that, because these are loaded terms. If you mean by liberty is a negative right in the sense that it denotes the absence of things, like the absence of duties, then yes. And by positive rights means the claim denotes the presence of duties, then yes. Yeah. There's no need to confuse things further. So, in those terms, the state of nature, we have a natural right, meaning the absence of any moral barriers to your own preservation. Morally speaking, everything goes. That's why he thinks it's morally empty, right? There's only one right, so it's just anything goes. So that's not really much of a, it's not much of a right, right? That's not, you think, here's my moral code, and anything goes. There are no rules, right? Like, that's my rule, there are no rules. Big deal. All right, we'll get more into that next time. See you Thursday.